So if I have low progesterone, I am not going to sleep at night. Cholesterol is really just this 27 carbon molecule. I never, before the past 3 years, have had so many patients talking about hair loss. Protein in the morning was much more beneficial than protein in the middle of the day. People had the best muscle building response, cold therapy, either cold plunges or cryotherapy, really beneficial for mitochondrial biogenesis.
Welcome to our Q&A highlights. Q&A sessions are recorded every month, and our enhanced members get an exclusive opportunity to ask questions from one of cellular medicine's brightest minds, Dr. Elizabeth Yurth. Get a chance to ask your questions by becoming our enhanced member at bli.academy/memberships. You also get access to our content library full of tips, articles, videos, lectures, previous live Q&A sessions, and more.
Cholesterol in the diet is so misunderstood. The US guidelines for cholesterol are 300 milligrams, but frankly, that's just ignorant and ridiculous. And every other country has removed the limitation on dietary cholesterol. So to understand why dietary cholesterol means very little, if anything, you have to understand a little bit more about cholesterol. So cholesterol is really just this 27 carbon molecule that is one of the many organic acids in our body, but it's absolutely critical to life. Without cholesterol, you will die. Your brain won't work, your neurons won't work. And if anything, we're seeing, at least in our practice, an epidemic of people with too low cholesterol. So cholesterol that's been driven down by statin drugs or, other medications that has pushed cholesterol so low that people can't myelinate their brain, they can't function, they lose muscle function. This is actually a critical problem. So cholesterol is only produced by animals. Plant cholesterol is called phytosterols. So when you eat plant-type cholesterol, it's a very different type of cholesterol. We can eat cholesterol. So if you eat steak, you're eating cholesterol. But most, by far, of the cholesterol that you are getting systemically is what your body is making. It by far outweighs the cholesterol you could eat. And cholesterol comes in two forms, esterified and unesterified. Only unesterified cholesterol can be absorbed by the body. Esterified has this big side chain on it, so it makes it not absorbable. It's just too big. So basically, most of the cholesterol we eat is esterified. So it just passes through us. So not that much of it is actually absorbed. So take away your belief that you need to eat more cholesterol or you need to eat less cholesterol. You need to eat a healthy diet, and then your body needs to be adept at making proper amounts of cholesterol. And then taking that cholesterol where it should go, which is to your brain and your nerves and your muscles and not into your arteries. So basically now, so how do we get this cholesterol level? So your liver makes cholesterol and triglycerides, and it's really in response to foods that you're eating. So if you eat a whole lot of triglycerides, like carbohydrates, then your liver is going to be overwhelmed with triglycerides, right? So if you're eating a whole lot of carbohydrates, your liver makes more triglycerides and makes more cholesterol. So lots of times there's a big link to carbohydrate intake and the cholesterol, excess cholesterol that your liver's making. It's too much energy. So the liver then tries to transport the cholesterol. It has to transport the cholesterol out of the liver to get to the cells. And those lipoproteins are carried, they can't walk themselves. So you have these apolipoproteins that carry the lipids to their destinations. And there's two types. There's apolipoprotein B, that's carrying all the small, dense, bad particles. And there's apolipoprotein A, and that's carrying all of the good, healthy, big, buoyant particles. So looking at that ratio gives you a little bit of a sense of whether I have more of these very dense fiber cholesterol, and those are the bad ones, more because they're filled with more triglycerides. It's not cholesterol so much as triglycerides that they're full of, versus these large fluffy particles. So when the liver produces too much cholesterol, overwhelming the system, like you're eating tons and tons of carb intake, or bile acids are really dysfunctional, then you make too much cholesterol, and the cholesterol starts not being able to get to its right destination. It starts getting deposited in your artery walls. That's where it's a problem. And it has nothing to do with how much steak you ate. So take that out of your head. Here's what your diet needs to be. You need healthy fats, so good bile acids, healthy fats. You need to keep your carb intake, not necessarily zero, but at a lower level, right? You need a high protein, lower carbohydrate diet with healthy fats. And then you need to work on making sure that you have adequate methyltransferase system to make sure that the lipids are going to the right place. You need to make sure that you have adequate amino acids. So those are the keys. And when you're looking at markers of whether this is all working, things that you can look at in your blood are the apolipoprotein B to A ratio. You can look at the triglyceride number, much, much, much more important than the cholesterol number, particularly the triglyceride to HDL ratio. And then you can look at inflammatory markers like myeloperoxidase, C-reactive protein, oxidized LDLs, PLAC. These are all things we look at that tell us there's inflammation in the blood vessels, telling us that there is too much deposit of this cholesterol into the blood vessels. So that's how you know whether things have gone awry. And then you don't change things by saying, oh, I need to lower cholesterol by taking a statin drug. I need to look at where the problem lies and how do I get the liver to stop making so much cholesterol? How do I feed the liver correctly? So I hope that makes sense. I hope that clears it up because this is such a confusing topic. You guys really have to remember that high cholesterol, we actually love to see cholesterol 220 to 250, but we don't want to see super high triglycerides. And we want to see the ApoB-A ratio good, but mostly we don't want to see those high myeloperoxidase, PLAC. We don't want to see those markers high. Cholesterol is a good thing. It is going to be, we know that if you have higher cholesterol, you have a bigger brain. We are suppressing cholesterol too much. So I hope that answers your question, Bella. Please take that to heart. Please share that information. It's so important for us to understand that. We know that progesterone is critical for both men and women. It's our mood calming, sleep inducing, libido inducing, bone enhancing hormone. And it's as important in men as women. Men start to get stiff joints, achy, not sleeping well. A lot of times it's progesterone induced. So progesterone is also a precursor to testosterone. So basically men need progesterone for testosterone. And as they age, just like all their other hormones, progesterone levels decrease. So natural production by the testes and adrenals in men starts to decrease at a pretty young age. And so progesterone levels start to drop. Men start to get more irritable, more anxious. That's that grumpy old man kind of thing. They're not sleeping as well. Their libido goes down. The erection quality goes down. A lot of times it's not testosterone, it's progesterone. So you have to balance progesterone too. So lack of energy, lack of libido, hair loss, all can be contributed. Weight gain, bone loss, all can be contributed to low progesterone. We measure progesterone. So progesterone is a little hard to measure in serum because it's in such low quantities in men, but you can measure it in our Dutch test, our urine test. If it's low, we treat it. If it's not low, we don't treat it. So you can test and see if it's low. It's very protective for prostate. It used to be used for kind of preventing prostate cancer. So you would use scrotal progesterone in men who with early prostate cancer. It was actually really helpful even in maybe protecting the prostate. So we know it has very prostate protecting effects. So I have men do a tiny dose before they go to bed at night, helps with sleep, helps with joint pain. They wake up less stiff. They're less mean. You know, it's a great hormone for both men and women. So number one, first thing is we need a hell of a lot more protein than we ever thought. I'm pushing this to my clients. Protein is critically important. It's critically important to fat loss, to maintaining bone, to maintaining muscle. We know that muscle loss, sarcopenia, is a leading cause of aging. It's not just something that happens. It's a cause of aging. So we need to make sure that people are getting at least a gram of protein for every pound of body weight. So remember, protein is really what you're getting with protein is these essential amino acids. And those are the building blocks for protein. And each of them has different functions. Leucine is an mTOR stimulator. And then you have arginine that stimulates nitric oxide production. And you have lysine and carnitine that are really important for fat loss and for vascular and neural health. So each of these amino acids, so sometimes it may come down to maybe specifying some specific amino acids that might be helpful. But when you look at sort of a good overall source of all these amino acids that you can get pretty easily, like if you're at the gym, it would be sort of a whey protein source, right? We know that plant proteins, again, are not as useful as the animal-based protein. So whey protein is a really good source. Digestion absorption is about 95% higher for animal protein than for plant protein. So it's significantly more beneficial to eat animal-based protein. When you eat fiber-based protein, remember that, or plant-based protein, that the fiber is attached to the proteins. So you have to basically digest it in a different way. And it's much more complicated of a process and not so easily obtainable to us. Now, what about timing? So we always kind of push this that you need to have your protein within a couple of hours, like at 2 hours of your workout to really get muscle building. And the data does support that up to a point. And then what they found was when people hit a certain level of training, that it didn't matter that much. As long as they got their protein in, it actually didn't matter that much that they timed it so much right after the workout. And yet, while people were still really building muscle and developing at an earlier stage, it did. Protein in the morning was much more beneficial than protein in the middle of the day. People had the best muscle building response by shooting for protein in the morning, and then in the evening. And the middle day was not quite as critical. You need it because you need to get that full grams of protein in. So shooting for like 40, 45 grams at that first meal, and that last meal that's like 5 or 6 in the evening, and then eating maybe 1 or 2 meals in the middle of the day to try and get more of that protein in, right? So if you're somebody who's trying to lose weight, you might concentrate on, a 3 meal. If you're trying to somebody who's really trying to hypertrophy muscle, you might get into that 4 meal state. If you have sort of an elderly person who just doesn't want to eat, you really focus on those 2 meals at least, that they're getting a lot of protein in that first and last meal. The most effective ways to improve mitochondrial health. We'll tell you the easiest, cheapest way is exercise. And we know that there's 2 types of exercise. One is short burst training and weightlifting, and the other is zone 2 training. So it's longer training. Basically, it's that exercise at a pace where you could sit there and talk to your friend while you're walking up your mountain, but you wouldn't really want to. You're not dying out of breath. You could talk to somebody, but you're not going to be carrying on this casual conversation with them. That's sort of the zone 2 training. At least once a week, you're doing a longer training in that zone 2 we know is important for mitochondrial health. And then in between time, doing that short burst HIIT training we know is important for mitochondrial health. Other things, cold therapy, either cold plunges or cryotherapy, really beneficial for mitochondrial biogenesis, as is saunas. So infrared sauna, really super helpful for mitochondrial function. So those are some kind of the simple things that you can do. But I'll add MOD-SC, right? So 4 times a year, cycling MOD-SC to improve mitochondrial biogenesis. How about ketones? Ketones also really important for mitochondrial health. And then I love that urolithin A in even in high-level athletes has been shown to improve endurance, improve athletic performance. That's because it really does enhance mitochondrial function. It enhances our ATP production. But she has noticed that her hair is thinning out quite a bit, especially in the front. What could be the cause of this? Which I told her, first off, Cynthia, make sure you talk to your provider about that. But hair loss is really complicated. Oddly, the past 3 years, there's been a rampant wave of hair loss, particularly in women. You can look it up. It's like, and nobody really knows. Everybody said, well, it's COVID, but it seems to happen not even people who didn't have COVID. It's stress. We don't really know the answer. If you're a conspiracy theorist, come up with some good conspiracies on this one because it is rampant. I never before the past 3 years have had so many patients talking about hair loss. So there may be, something more to this whole story that's going on for our immune systems that's causing this hair loss in women. But when I look at hair loss, I always look at, is it more male pattern balding, right? So male pattern balding is kind of what you described. You're going to be seeing more receding hairline, right? Loss in the temporal region here versus female pattern balding. Female pattern balding seems to just more be diffuse thinning of the hair throughout. If it's male pattern balding, then you've got to really look, are testosterone levels too high? And maybe they're not too high by the labs, but they're too high for you. Or they're not balanced with estrogen, right? So you can have normal testosterone, but no estrogen, you will get hair loss. Estrogen is really, really important for hair. So in women, when they just get low in estrogen and progesterone, they will get this just diffuse thinning. So you need to look at hormones and hormones being balanced, right? Is the testosterone too high? Sometimes you'll look at serum blood levels and testosterone doesn't look bad. But then we'll look at like a Dutch test, the urine dried hormone test, and we'll see that a lot of their testosterone is just going down into DHT, which is the big culprit of testosterone that causes the hair loss. So in those people, sometimes we'll have to use things to block the DHT a little bit more. Now, remember, when you block DHT, you also block muscle building a little bit. So you have to kind of walk that fine line. But you can use things like spironolactone or a very low dose of finasteride, a very low, tiny dose of finasteride, things like that to somewhat block the DHT in those people. And you really need to measure that and looking at your metabolites to really know that. So hormone dysfunction, thyroid also, remember T3 is a big player here as well. You need adequate T3 for hair growth. And then lastly, I really look at micronutrient deficiency. So you have to look at the micronutrients, make sure that all the B vitamins are up to par, make sure they have enough choline. Those are all really important. And then when you fix all that and there's still hair loss, there's something immune going on. We really like using some of the thymic peptides for hair loss. So thymosin beta 4 works really well for hair loss. Working on making sure the immune system is in a really healthy state is really important, because there does seem to be an immune dysregulation going on in some of these people who are losing their hair over the past few years. So those are all kind of options we also use for helping regrow the hair. So once you kind of figure out, stop it from falling out, you have to regrow the loss. So basically we'll use things like the high dose thymosin beta 4. You can topically use GHK copper, zinc thymulin. I like the Theradome red light. So using the red light is really helpful too to regrow hair. So those are options for kind of regrowing hair. Thymosin beta 4 will also help stop the hair loss just because it has immune modulating properties as well. We kind of never think about oral health and hormones, right? Like you think about hormones for all these other things. Certainly think about them from cardiovascular and brain and sex drive and muscle building. We don't think about them for oral health. And yet we hear over and over again that oral health is critical to longevity, right? And then we ignore the fact that hormones are essential to oral hygiene. Now we know that falling estrogen levels, not only do you lose bone density, so your teeth start loosening because you don't have good jawbone, so you start to lose teeth, which is bad. You get much more gum inflammation because of the loss of some of the gum tissue as estrogen levels fall. And so you get loose, missing teeth, bleeding, pain, but also start making less saliva. So when you have less saliva, you get dry mouth, which is associated with a change in the whole microbiome in the mouth. And so now this dry mouth, people are trying to drink more water and things like that, but that's not helping because your saliva is a critical piece of the microbiome. So keeping this salivary flow going in your mouth is really important. And so now women start getting, not only dry mouth, but a lot of conditions associated with that. We'll see burning mouth syndrome. I know Emily has a couple of patients with burning mouth syndrome, and that can probably be prevented. Once it starts, it's hard. It can probably be prevented if we keep hormones at a higher level. And nobody tells these women that, right? And so you're preventing this horribly painful disease, right? This burning mouth syndrome is bad. And then you can prevent that a lot by keeping salivary flow going and keeping estrogen levels high enough. I will say that vegans are at very high risk for a lot of deficiency, B12 deficiency. So you have to make sure you're taking additional B12, some of the other B vitamins, omega-3 fats, very deficient omega-3 fats. It's very hard to get omega-3 fats just from plant sources, at least not without getting some of the more toxic seed oil plant sources. There are lots of plant foods that contain omega-3s, but not in the form. And we see the vegan diet people have, when we do prodrome scans, when I see people with vegan diet, they don't look good at all. I will tell you that. And I don't think Brian's done a prodrome scan on himself, but I tell you, they do not look good on a prodrome scan, which concerns me over overall longevity in terms of things like your brain. It's also really hard to get enough protein from muscle. And so I think that over time there is muscle loss, unless you really have a really good person who is really legitimately planning things out really well for you. He says, other than VIP, which is vasoactive intestinal peptide, and epitalon, what are your favorite peptides for recalibrating circadian function? And this is really important because, as we know, disruptions in circadian balance are at the root of a lot of diseases. It's why shift workers, people who are working during the night and sleeping during the day, have much higher incidence of obesity, metabolic disease, cancer. So we know that even if you're sleeping in a dark room, that circadian disrupt is really bad for us. So what can we use to help that circadian rebalance? VIP and epitalon are definitely great, and I like to do epitalon if I really want to hit hard. For circadian rhythm, I hit a pretty high dose, pretty hard for a short period of time. But we're getting more and more familiar now with what we call bioregulator peptides, and there's a bioregulator peptide called pinealon. And so if you think about the pineal gland in our brain, that's the one that senses light, dark, and starts the whole process of us being awake during the day and asleep during the night. So the pineal gland, which starts to calcify as we age, which is one of the reasons as we age, our circadian rhythms get so disrupted, is that we get this calcification of the pineal gland. So if we can keep pineal gland activity up, we can restore circadian balance. So I think the bioregulator peptide pinealon can be really, really helpful. I think, when you look at these bioregulator peptides, they're very, very small. So they can circumvent lipid bilayers like the cell membrane, and they can interact directly with DNA. And when you look at pinealon's effect on adjusting sleep, it seems to have a really pretty good influence in getting people back into circadian balance. And so usually what you'll do is like a 2-week course, or a really 30-day course at a pretty high dose. And then what you'll do is you really like 10 days out of each month, you might do another hit of it to keep the circadian balance going. But I like pineal on for this purpose. I think that its data is looking pretty robust to support it in this effect. All of the peptide bioregulators really come from a Russian lab, from Dr. Kavinson's lab. If you're finding them in other places, then they're probably not real. So he has a patent on all of these bioregulators. I am just honestly getting a little more comfortable with bioregulators. I've been a little bit of a skeptic about bioregulators, but I became a little bit more convinced, just decided I'd start experimenting with them a little bit more. And I am seeing some results with them. So I do think they have some benefits. They're probably not as robust as peptides are for us, but they are still probably have some play in this longevity world. And they're oral, which is nice. So you can take them orally instead of another injection. I also will say DSIP, deep sleep inducing peptide. Deep sleep inducing peptide either works or it doesn't. It doesn't work for everybody, but in some people, it's really helpful. It was discovered back in the 1970s when they actually induced a state of sleep in rabbits. I think they actually gave them electric shock. So, to induce this sleep state. And they found that they had very high levels when they were in this induced sleep of this peptide, DSIP. It's also found in very high amounts in breast milk. That's why when babies nurse, they fall right asleep afterwards. This is very high levels of DSIP. So when it's been studied a lot in sleep, and although the research has been a bit controversial in it, overall, most of the research still shows a positive effect on improving circadian rhythm. So DSIP is another peptide to kind of keep in mind in that realm. I will say finding the dosing of it for people and the timing of it for people is tricky. And some people love it and it works amazing, and some people don't. And I think some of that's probably us not being able to figure out exactly dosing and timing for different people. So if I have low progesterone, I am not going to sleep at night. So has that been fixed, right? So, number one, go back to that. Are all the necessary minerals there to help with normal circadian function? You need zinc, you need selenium. Those are all really important for circadian rhythm as well. And then if people aren't sleeping, now we start going to some of the sort of reset peptides like epitalon, right? Can I then use a course of epitalon on you to sort of get that circadian balance back? Or something called DSIP, which stands for deep sleep inducing peptide. DSIP is made in large amounts in breast milk. And remember when you would nurse your baby and then they're drugged and they fall asleep, there's these high levels of DSIP. So you can use deep sleep inducing peptide sometimes to help people to kind of get back into a deep sleep state. And then the growth hormone secretagogues are critical here too. Because one of the things that helps us to sleep soundly at night is an upsurge of growth hormone. Remember your little kids, remember when you pick up your little kids, you could carry them from the car to the room and they never woke up, right? It's because they have these really high levels of circulating growth hormone at night, just keeps them in this nice deep sleep. But as we age, we don't get that growth hormone surge at night. So it's really important then to use like the growth hormone secretagogues, CJC and ipamorelin or tesamorelin and ipamorelin before you go to bed, and you get this nice growth hormone surge at night, which helps with deep sleep. NAD. What is it? What does it do? And who should take it? For those of you who don't know what NAD is, it stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. And basically every organism from single cells have NAD, can't live without it. It's a molecule that's critical to mitochondria. It helps convert food energy. So basically turns food into energy. It's a really important shuttle to transfer electrons from one molecule to another within cells. So it carries out it's necessary for almost every reaction process in your body. You could not survive without NAD. Okay. It also regulates circadian rhythm. I can't emphasize enough that this is a critical molecule and its levels drop with age. So makes sense. We should just give more NAD. All is fine. Levels drop when we age. We give more. We fix all these problems, except not so simple. The problem is that NAD is dropping because other things going on. Enzymes that degrade NAD, for instance, something called CD38 or an enzyme called NNMT. And those degrading enzymes, if I give a bunch of NAD, they're still out there firing, right? But the other thing that happens is NAD, if I take it orally or I give it as an IV infusion or I give myself injections of it, it's extracellular. It's outside your cells. There's no way to get NAD inside the cells. There's no receptor. There's one that they maybe have found that's a weak receptor for NAD into the cells, but in general, it can't get into the cells. So it sits in the extracellular space. When the NAD-NADH ratio, which is the critical factor, starts getting very high, so the body then senses that it's in too much of an energy state. And what's it going to do? It's going to shut off AMPK. It's going to be basically when AMPK gets shut off, that's a message inside the cell that we're now in a stress state. And it inside the cell upregulates a molecule called P53. And that protein is one of your main cancer fighting proteins. So now I've increased my risk of protein. I also start a big inflammatory state. Remember, the cells that are growing the fastest in your body, your senescent cells and your cancer cells, they love that high NAD out there, right? So now they're thriving, and maybe your cells not so well. So it's that NAD NADH ratio. If you gave just enough NAD and it was perfect, but I don't know how much that is. I have no idea. I think maybe you're better off doing the precursors, particularly NMN. At least that can get intracellularly, but you still have the problem. Some of that's going to stay outside the cell, get broken down into NAD, and then same process happens. So where we've been focusing some of our research on is working on these other enzymes, right? And particularly one called NNMT. And NNMT is really interesting because it's very upregulated in disease states. It's upregulated in cancer. It's upregulated in viruses. It's upregulated in aging. So NNMT may be a big player here. And if you can regulate NNMT, you can regulate NAD levels and keep everything very healthy. You don't lose NAD. You don't get these ratios screwed up. So we're right now, there's not really anything good I can offer. There's a very expensive peptide called 5-amino-1-MQ that does block NNMT. But we're really close to getting something to you guys. In fact, some of our clients here have already gotten it. Something that's going to block this enzyme. And I think that's going to be the answer to this question. I think that's going to be the safe way to raise NAD levels. So stay with us because we may be some of the first to be able to sort of solve some of this problem. But I'd be very cautious. And do I think you should never do NAD? Maybe I know there's people doing it. I know people who swear by it. I personally think you're playing with matches. I think you have to be careful. I know that's contrary to what you guys are hearing. I know it's contrary to what all the health coaches, everybody loves NAD. And I will tell you, you will feel better with an NAD infusion. It's a temporary infusion. Everything gets fired up. That's not a good thing long-term. So maybe I'm wrong, but I think you need to be cautious.